3 clicks of her camera. 1 murder. 2 seconds before the killers saw her face. Jasmine's camera clicked 3 times before she realized what she'd captured. The slick Tokyo pavement blurred beneath Jasmine's worn sneakers. Her lungs burned. Her camera, her only defense, swung uselessly against her hip. They'd seen her. The men in the black trench coats were closing the distance. Their silent pursuit more terrifying than a shout. They were not police. They were killers. She hit the ornate, unmarked doors of an Akasaka sushi restaurant, bursting past the bowing staff and skidding to a halt. One glance confirmed her fate. The exit was blocked. But then she saw him seated in the quietest booth, surrounded by men who looked like carved granite. The Yakuza boss, Takeshi Yamamoto. He was the anchor in a rising tide of disaster. She had 3 seconds to live or die. She didn't choose. Her body acted, shoving the camera onto the mahogany table and collapsing into the booth, her mouth crashing against his astonished cheek. The air around them froze. "You promised not to follow me to work, Takeshi," she gasped, her voice raw, gripping the lapels of his impossibly expensive suit. His eyes, cold and depthless, held no recognition, but the threat in the doorway was imminent. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Then, his hand, heavy and deliberate, clamped around her waist, pulling her onto his lap with a possessive, almost brutal ease. The moment the killers appeared in the doorway, Takeshi leaned in, his breath a warm, dangerous secret against her ear. "There's my girl," he murmured, loud enough for the men in black to hear, his smile lethal and calm. The assassins froze, assessed the situation, and with a collective, grudging bow to the Yakuza boss, they backed out into the neon night. The danger was gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. Jasmine was still trapped on his lap, his hand a branding iron on her hip. She had bought her life with a lie, but the price of telling the truth was about to be much higher. She slowly met Takeshi's gaze. The coldness was still there, but a sliver of something else, interest, or maybe utter fury, had replaced astonishment. He didn't ask who she was, he only asked, "How long do you plan on being my girl? You need to know how she survives the next 60 seconds. Right? The story is just getting started, but the only way to see what happens next is to subscribe now. Don't leave Jasmine to face the dragon of Tokyo alone." "How long do you plan on being my girl?" Takeshi's question was a statement, not a query. The grip on her hip tightened, a subtle reminder that her borrowed sanctuary was controlled entirely by him. Jasmine, still struggling to breathe normally, forced herself to meet his gaze. She didn't flinch. She was a professional photojournalist, trained to stand in front of danger and capture it. This was just a different kind of lens. "Until the men chasing me forget my face. Takeshi." She used his name like a lifeline, testing the boundaries of the deception. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, revealing a dangerous dimple. He slid her gently off his lap and onto the leather seat beside him, finally releasing her. His motion was fluid, predatory, like a cat stretching before a strike. His men, silent observers of the entire performance, now moved to shield the booth with their bodies, creating a wall of black suits. Takeshi picked up her camera, turning the heavy, expensive device in his hands. He opened the back and removed the memory card, the damning evidence of the event she'd witnessed and photographed. "They will never forget your face, Jasmine," he corrected, leaning back. "They belong to the Red Dragon Triad. They will hunt you across 3 continents for this." He tossed the memory card into a glass of water, watching the bubble rise and burst. Her heart sank with it. "But now," he continued, his voice low, "you are not running from them. You are hiding with me. They will be cautious." He slid a piece of fine stationery across the table, a contract in miniature. "My family is hosting a major economic summit next week. They expect me to bring a bride. Play the role for 1 month. In return, I will ensure those killers disappear. Completely." It was an impossible choice, the devil she didn't know, or the one staring her down. She looked at the ruined memory card, then at the contract. The men who had been chasing her had been hired to eliminate her entire existence. She was already dead without his protection. "And if I refuse?" she whispered. "Then you leave this room alone," he countered, his cold eyes unblinking. "And I make no promises about what happens 10 minutes after you step onto the street." He waited, enjoying the tension, the silence thick with unspoken threat. What was on that contract? What did being the Yakuza boss's fake bride really entail? Jasmine picked up the stationery. It felt like fine, heavy cotton, a deadly contrast to the brutal, unspoken agreement written upon it. She signed the contract with a quiet, decisive stroke of the pen Takeshi offered, feeling the phantom weight of a Yakuza clan settling onto her shoulders. 1 month. Protection guaranteed. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the fear churning in her stomach. What does a Yakuza boss's bride do? Takeshi's lethal smile returned, sharper this time. He didn't answer directly. You have a lot to learn. Starting with the fact that my woman does not walk alone. He had his men immediately remove her from the restaurant, the world outside becoming a blur of expensive black cars and hushed subservience. She was taken to a secure, silent penthouse overlooking the city. A designer, a tailor, and a makeup artist, all bowing deeply, were summoned, stripping her of her worn clothes and replacing her photojournalist's identity with silk gowns and jewels that felt like shackles. Takeshi sat in an armchair, watching the transformation with an unnerving, proprietary interest. He taught her the rules like deadly secrets. Never speak unless spoken to by a family elder. Never flinch at violence. And most critically, never, under any circumstances, allow anyone to believe their relationship was anything less than all-consuming. They will test you, he warned after the staff had left, pulling her close. The scent of sandalwood and danger overwhelmed her. The wives, the rivals, everyone. Your performance must be flawless. His hand slid up her back, resting just beneath the neckline of her new dress. We will start practicing the flawless part now. The pressure of his fingers against her skin was a terrifying promise. She was no longer just running. She was now trapped in a diamond cage, owned by a man who was utterly ruthless. When he leaned in, his intent clear, she realized she hadn't considered one vital detail. The degree of intimacy they had to fake to keep the lie believable. Was her body now part of the contract? And worse, was he truly going to kiss her again? Takeshi didn't kiss her. He held her, his gaze locked on hers, demanding a reaction she wasn't ready to give. The intimacy was a calculated weapon, a drill meant to break down her defenses. He was testing her performance, judging whether she was worth the trouble. His thumb traced the sharp line of her collarbone, a non-sexual touch that was somehow more possessive than a kiss. A good liar believes her own story, Jasmine. You must feel every moment of this. He finally released her, the tension immediately returning to the air. For the next 2 days, the penthouse became her gilded cage and his private stage. He forced her to rehearse scenarios, laughing at his dry jokes during mock dinners, leaning on his arm as they walked through the marble halls, defending him with fictional jealousy to his subordinates. The hardest part wasn't the physical proximity, but the way he forced her to learn him, his habits, his subtle nods, the things that made the silent men around him defer. She was filling a blank space in his life, and the closer she looked, the more she saw the ruthless intelligence behind the Yakuza mask. In one rehearsal, when she stumbled over a line, he pulled her back instantly, their chests brushing. You hesitate, he observed, his voice dark. Hesitation is death. He demonstrated the required emotion, a lingering, almost desperate glance of love, and for a single, bewildering second, the depth of emotion in his eyes felt alarmingly real. Later that evening, exhausted and alone in the massive suite, Jasmine received a hidden message. A single red rose left on her pillow, tied with a simple, anonymous black ribbon. It wasn't a romantic gesture from Takeshi. It was a threat, a silent warning that the killers knew exactly where she was. Inside the fortress. Her fake protection was failing, and the rose felt like a funeral flower. Takeshi had promised her safety, but was he hiding her? Or was he just using her as bait? She needed to escape, but the penthouse security was impenetrable. The day of the Yamamoto summit arrived, wrapping Jasmine in a suffocating bubble of glamour and dread. The venue was a sprawling estate outside Tokyo, guarded by men in suits and shadowed by men who were clearly not. She wore a deep emerald gown that felt less like fashion and more like armor, its color a stark contrast to the severe black and white world of the Yakuza elite. Her entry with Takeshi was a calculated power play. His hand settled on the small of her back, the weight of it guiding her, pushing her, announcing her. Every eye in the room, from the elderly, stone-faced Oyakata family head to the sleek, calculating wives and the rival bosses, was trained on them. They were judging her, testing the credibility of her sudden appearance. The true test came from Takeshi's cousin, Kaito. Kaito was charming, educated in London, and clearly saw Takeshi as an obstacle. He approached them with a smooth, disarming smile. Takeshi, you introduced the lovely American. But you neglect to tell me how you convinced such a free spirit to abandon her camera for a cage. The accusation was thinly veiled. Before Jasmine could formulate a safe, neutral reply, Takeshi's grip on her waist tightened almost painfully. He didn't speak. Instead, he simply lowered his head, silencing the room, and kissed her. It was not the brief, possessive peck from the restaurant, nor the studied indifference of their rehearsals. This kiss was deep, consuming, and terrifyingly real. It was a brutal performance of ownership designed to crush Kaido's challenge and assert their fabricated passion. Jasmine could taste the scotch and the faint, underlying scent of sandalwood. She gripped the silk of his jacket, forcing herself to respond, to match his intensity, praying she looked convincingly enamored instead of terrified. The kiss lasted only seconds, but when Takeshi pulled back, his eyes were smoky, his breathing uneven. He had proven his point. The crowd accepted the show, murmuring approval, but Kaido's smile faltered. "Are you convinced, Kaido?" Takeshi asked, his voice low and laced with triumph. Kaido could only nod, his defeat acknowledged. Jasmine felt dizzy. Her carefully constructed wall of detachment shattered. She had just shared a deeply intimate moment with a man she barely knew. A man who had killed to get where he was. All to save her own life. As Takeshi guided her away, his hand remained on her waist. But this time, the touch didn't feel entirely like control. It felt like shared electricity. The line between Jasmine the photojournalist and Jasmine the Yakuza bride had vanished, incinerated by that kiss. She had just gone from pretending to feeling something dangerously real. What happens when the role she's playing starts to feel more like her actual life? The summit felt like a battlefield, and Jasmine was exhausted from the performance. The adrenaline from the kiss, that terrible, necessary lie, had finally burned out, leaving her hollow. She was trapped in the library of the estate, seeking a momentary reprieve from the claustrophobic opulence. She wasn't looking for an exit. She was looking for air. She found neither. Instead, she found an anomaly. A small, concealed door disguised as a bookshelf, slightly ajar. Curiosity, the trait that had made her a successful photojournalist, and had landed her in this mess, overruled caution. She slipped through, finding herself in a narrow, unlit corridor that smelled sharply of chemicals and damp earth, a world away from the sandalwood and silk of the summit. The corridor led her to a small, windowless security room. On the monitors, she saw the outside perimeter. A man in the uniform of the estate's private security team was receiving a small, discreet package from a messenger. But the messenger wasn't the delivery boy he pretended to be. It was one of the killers from the restaurant, the same man who had been chasing her across Tokyo. Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. The red rose on her pillow was not a vague threat, it was active surveillance. The triad hadn't backed down. They had simply infiltrated the very security detail Takeshi relied upon. Her safe house was compromised. She realized that Takeshi's protection wasn't a fortress, it was a contested zone, and she was the prize. Before she could process the image, a sound came from the corridor, the sharp click of a shoe heel on stone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She whirled around, scrambling to hide behind a stack of unused surveillance equipment. The door swung open and Takeshi's cousin, Kaido, stepped into the room. He didn't notice her immediately, his attention fixed on the monitors. Kaido smiled a cruel, satisfied smile as he watched the guard receive the package. He was speaking quietly into a hidden microphone. "Tell the triad that the package will be delivered soon. Tonight. The boss's new girl is a delightful distraction, but distractions must be removed." He was working with the triad, selling her out, and now he knew she was there. Jasmine was cornered, knowing too much, trapped not by the enemy, but by the deceit within Takeshi's own family. Kaido turned slowly, his eyes calculating, settling directly on her hiding spot. She was exposed, terrified, and faced with the horrifying realization that her only protector was surrounded by traitors. Kaido's smile was chilling, devoid of the charm he wore like a tailored suit. He stepped closer, blocking the door. "Such a curiosity you are, Jasmine, always poking your lens where it doesn't belong." He pulled a length of silk cord from his sleeve, a silent, deadly preparation. Takeshi is too distracted by pretty trinkets to notice the rot beneath his feet. But thankfully, the triad has a better idea of your worth. Jasmine knew she couldn't outrun him, not in the confines of the security room. Her professional training, however, had included basic self-defense against aggressors much larger than her. As Kaido lunged, she didn't fight back directly. Instead, she used her emerald dress, pulling the heavy silk of her skirt tight and twisting, momentarily unbalancing him. She then grabbed the stack of monitors and shoved them forward, creating a cascade of heavy screens and wiring that crashed onto the floor, blinding Kaito with shattered glass and a spray of sparks. The noise, though muffled by the estate walls, was an alarm. She didn't wait to see if Kaito was downed. She bolted back up the narrow, chemical-scented corridor, emerging onto the main floor near the banquet hall, gasping for breath. The elegant music and drone of conversation hadn't stopped, but now every polite face seemed to blur into a mask of danger. She spotted Takeshi across the crowded room, deep in conversation with the Oyakata. She had to warn him, but a direct approach would expose the family betrayal publicly and likely get them both killed before the truth was understood. Then she saw the armed security guard, the one who had just received the package from the Triad killer, moving toward Takeshi with ominous purpose. He was closing the distance, his hand inching inside his jacket. Jasmine made a choice fueled by terror and the undeniable, messy loyalty she had developed for her fake protector. She launched herself across the polished floor, ignoring the shocked gasps. She didn't yell a warning. Instead, she grabbed the nearest item, a heavy, antique silver champagne bucket, and hurled it across the room. The bucket hit the security guard with a loud, ringing clang just as he drew his weapon. The guard stumbled, dropping the gun. Takeshi, whose back was to the commotion, turned instantly, his eyes flashing with lethal comprehension. He saw the guard, the weapon, and Jasmine out of breath, hair disheveled, standing near the wrecked entrance to the hidden corridor. Before Takeshi could react, two men from the Triad, having gained entry through Kaito's compromised security, grabbed Jasmine from behind. They moved with brutal efficiency, dragging her toward the nearest service door. She fought, scratching and kicking, desperately locking eyes with Takeshi one last time. His expression was a storm of raw, unguarded fury, betrayal, and sudden, shocking fear for her. He shouted her name, a sound that sliced through the high society silence of the room. But it was too late. The heavy door slammed shut, separating her from the man who was both her captor and her only chance of survival. She was gone. The chaos in the Triad safe house was a symphony of destruction. Gunshots, shattered glass, and the guttural shouts of men replaced the previous tense silence. Zhao, enraged by the unexpected speed of the assault, had Jasmine clamped against the window frame, a human shield. "Tell him to stand down. Now," Zhao hissed, his knife glinting dangerously near her throat. Jasmine ignored the terror, focusing only on the chaos below. She spotted Takeshi. He wasn't leading the main assault team. He was already inside the adjacent warehouse, moving with impossible speed, a sleek, black figure cutting through the shadows. He looked like an avenging deity, fueled by the fury she had seen flash in his eyes just before she was dragged away. She took a deep, shaky breath, and instead of screaming the retreat Zhao demanded, she yelled the only thing that mattered, using the distraction she knew would buy time. "Kaito sold you out, Zhao. He's working with the Yamamoto elders." The revelation struck Zhao like a physical blow. His grip loosened, his focus fracturing between the betrayal and the approaching danger. That tiny moment of confusion was all Takeshi needed. He burst into the room through the connecting warehouse door, his entrance marked not by gunfire, but by absolute, silent, focused violence. He didn't waste time negotiating or ordering. He fired a single shot that struck Zhao's hand, forcing the Triad leader to drop the knife and stagger back with a howl of pain. Takeshi moved past Zhao as if he were already debris, his sole focus on Jasmine. He reached the window, not to unlock her, but to shield her completely as the remaining Triad men opened fire. The heavy metal chair offered little protection, but Takeshi didn't flinch. He used his own body as a barrier, releasing the restraints on her hands with swift, practiced precision. "My girl," he growled, the familiar possessive title now carrying a terrifying weight of reality. He didn't ask if she was hurt, he simply pulled her roughly against his side, shoving a small, warm pistol into her hand. "You shoot anyone who isn't wearing a black suit. Understand?" Jasmine, numb with shock and adrenaline, could only nod, the cold steel of the weapon grounding her. But the immediate threat was far from over. Zhao, bleeding and furious, staggered to his feet and slammed the emergency lockdown button. A heavy steel shutter began descending, sealing them inside the room, cutting them off from the Yakuza backup. Takeshi glanced at the closing shutter, then at Zhao, and then at the window overlooking the harbor. He had saved her, but they were now trapped together, armed and facing the cornered, bloodthirsty triad leader. He shoved her toward the window. "We jump. Now." The drop was at least 20 feet onto cold, black water. She hesitated, looking from the raging, trapped man to the perilous drop. She had escaped danger only to be faced with a deadly leap into the dark unknown with the most dangerous man in Tokyo. The memory card felt impossibly light in Jasmine's hand, yet heavier than the weight of a lifetime. Takeshi's quiet intensity had dissolved the final layer of pretense. He was offering her not just protection, but a permanent place at the epicenter of his chaos. "Partners don't lie about evidence," she said, her voice barely a whisper, clutching the tiny black chip. "You kept this. Why? You didn't trust me." Even after the kiss, after the ambush, Takeshi didn't flinch. He leaned back against the plush leather of the car seat, the scent of the sea and gunpowder giving way to his signature sandalwood. "Trust is earned, not given. The moment you chose to save my life, knowing the cost, you earned the right to have your weapon back. That card is your leverage. It's your escape route if I ever become a threat." "You already are a threat," Jasmine countered. But the fire behind the words was weak. She looked at the memory card, seeing not the damning photographs of the triad deal, but the raw, vulnerable look in Takeshi's eyes when she was dragged away. "I know," he conceded, a rare, chilling honesty in his voice. "But you are also the only one who doesn't treat me like a monster or a king. You treat me like a man who can be killed." He reached across the console, his hand coming to rest, not on her arm, but gently over the small curve of her stomach. The action was utterly unexpected, a flash of tenderness she hadn't anticipated. It was an acknowledgement of their shared intimacy, the fake relationship that had evolved into something too complex to name. "So, what does forever look like, Takeshi?" she asked, the question loaded with fear and a terrifying desire for stability. He looked out the window as the first light of dawn broke over Tokyo, painting the skyscrapers in hues of rose and steel. "It looks like a fight," he murmured. "It looks like the end of the Yamamoto Yakuza and the beginning of the Yamamoto Corporation. And it looks like you, standing beside me, taking the photo that proves it all. The world needs a distraction. We will give them one." He turned back to her, a genuine smile replacing the calculated one he usually wore. He was no longer pretending. He reached for her, pulling her close into the booth of the massive, custom-built vehicle. Her camera lay on the seat beside her, no longer a shield, but a tool for documenting their shared, impossible future. His hand remained, heavy and warm, resting on her abdomen. They were both smiling. The terrifying choice they made that night in the restaurant now sealed in a permanent, dangerous bond. Finally, Jasmine and Takeshi welcomed their daughter 6 months later. They named her Sakura after the cherry blossoms that fell the night they met. Takeshi fully transitioned his businesses to legitimate operations within 3 years. Jasmine's photography book, Between Worlds, won international acclaim. They're still together, still in love, still pretending they ever had a choice. You've made it through the entire story, from a desperate lie in a restaurant to an unbreakable commitment in the heart of Tokyo's underworld. But this is just one chapter in their incredible saga. Don't you deserve to know the full, unedited details of how they managed to escape the Triad's vengeance and what happens when their daughter asks about her father's business? You simply must subscribe to see the bonus epilogue and behind-the-scenes interviews. Don't miss out on the rest of the secrets.